4 distinct, earth-shattering scandals. 4 separate instances where the undeniable spotlight of congressional culpability illuminated her actions. And 4 consecutive times, a convenient, carefully selected scapegoat was meticulously positioned to absorb the political fallout. It was always an unfortunate misinterpretation, a deliberate taking out of context by hostile actors, a catastrophic failure of the bureaucratic system, or a regrettable accounting error committed by a faceless subordinate. "I have no knowledge of any fraudulent activity," she would recite, a perfectly rehearsed incantation designed to ward off any semblance of personal accountability. For 7 long, tumultuous years in the unforgiving arena of Washington politics, Representative Ilhan Omar had transformed the evasion of direct, consequential questions into a dark art form. Every congressional hearing, every high-stakes television interview, every impromptu ambush by a breathless reporter in the labyrinthine marble hallways of Capitol Hill, the routine remained frustratingly identical, a choreographed dance of denial. She would deflect with practiced ease, point a sharp, accusatory finger at an unseen institutional bias or a misunderstood linguistic nuance, and seamlessly pivot away from the core issue, walking away while leaving a trail of unanswered questions in her wake. That was the established playbook, the unbreakable deflective armor of a political survivor, until the day Ben Shapiro took a seat directly across from her in the sterile, wood-paneled confines of a congressional hearing room and articulated the one devastating truth that no one had ever dared to say to her face. He did not arrive to litigate a single, isolated scandal. He came to prosecute the entire, overarching pattern of deflection. He looked at her not with the typical deference afforded to a sitting member of Congress, but with the cold, calculating precision of a prosecutor who had already mapped out every possible exit route. "I am not interested in your explanations, Representative," he declared, his voice slicing through the heavy, expectant air of the room. "I am interested in why the explanation is always exactly the same. Every single time you get caught, somebody else is to blame. Let me tell you exactly what happens when somebody finally stops chasing the endless labyrinth of excuses and starts asking why there is always a newly minted excuse to chase." And by the time this meticulously orchestrated confrontation reached its climax, Shapiro would quietly read a single, verified number from her own, officially filed financial disclosures, a number so absurd, so entirely detached from the realm of plausibility that it caused the entire room to erupt into spontaneous, uncontainable laughter. Representative Omar, however, did not laugh. The protective walls of her political fortress were collapsing in real time, broadcast live to a nation watching with bated breath. The battleground was the Longworth House Office Building, room 1310, hosting the House Oversight Subcommittee on Pandemic Relief Fraud, with a hyper-focused lens on the catastrophic misappropriation of funds in Minnesota. Shapiro had been summoned as an expert witness, a role he inhabited with a coiled, kinetic energy. Representative Omar was present not by choice, but because the subcommittee's mandate demanded her attendance. She sat flanked by a formidable phalanx of 3 high-priced defense attorneys, their very presence a testament to the gravity of the impending storm. Shapiro, in stark contrast, brought nothing but his voice, his encyclopedic memory, and a stack of undeniable receipts. In the crucible of this hearing, only one of those arsenals would matter. He eschewed the standard, sycophantic protocols of congressional testimony. He did not offer a flowery introduction, he did not waste precious seconds thanking the esteemed chairman, and he explicitly refused to deliver a self-aggrandizing opening statement regarding his qualifications. Instead, he locked eyes directly with Ilhan Omar, the air in the room suddenly growing thick with anticipation, and launched his offensive with breathtaking velocity. "Representative Omar, March 2019. You spoke at a CARE fundraiser. You described the horrific September 11th attacks by saying, and I am quoting your exact words directly, CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something. Those are your words, correct?" Omar, see my. "I have addressed this specific issue on multiple occasions, and I believe," Shapiro severed her sentence with surgical precision, a polite but immovably firm interruption, like slamming a heavy oak door just before an intruder could step through the threshold. "Representative, I promise you I will get to the context in due time. But first, are those your words? I require a simple yes or a no." The hesitation was microscopic but palpable. Yes. Shapiro did not miss a beat. Thank you. February 2019, you tweeted extensively about why the United States Congress supports Israel. You explicitly wrote, "It's all about the Benjamins, baby." Your words, correct? Omar bristled, her posture stiffening. I have unequivocally apologized for... Shapiro's voice cut through again, relentless. Are those your words? A tighter, more reluctant, yes. That exact same month you stated on the floor before Congress, I want to talk about the political influence in this country that says it is okay for people to push for allegiance to a foreign country. Your words? Yes, but the full historical context of that, Shapiro, silenced the evasion entirely. 3 distinct quotes, 3 absolute confirmations. Thank you, Representative. In less than 60 seconds, a barrage that for 3 highly controversial quotes had been definitively confirmed on the congressional record, and Ilhan Omar had not been permitted to finish a single, deflective sentence. That is the terrifying, unyielding speed of Ben Shapiro. For those familiar with his debating cadence, this was him exercising remarkable restraint. For the uninitiated, it was a masterclass in rhetorical dominance. He processes and articulates arguments faster than most individuals can formulate a coherent thought, and the chilling reality for the Congresswoman was that he was merely conducting the preliminary warm-up. What transpired next fundamentally altered the entire trajectory and structural shape of the hearing. Shapiro abruptly ceased his rapid-fire interrogation of Omar, physically turning his body to address the committee members directly, delivering a statement that served as both a procedural pivot and a psychological trap. Mr. Chairman, I did not travel here today to relitigate 3 old, heavily publicized quotes. The United States Congress has already voted on those matters. The representative was consequentially removed from the Foreign Affairs Committee. As far as I am concerned, that specific chapter is permanently closed. Across the dais, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift occurred. Omar's tense shoulders relaxed just a fraction of an inch. She genuinely believed the most grueling portion of her testimony had concluded. In her mind, she had prepared for yet another repetitive, predictable hearing where conservative commentators read her old, inflammatory tweets. She dutifully reminds them of her past apologies, and the political caravan moves on without inflicting fatal damage. She was catastrophically wrong. Shapiro's voice lowered, taking on an ominous, authoritative timbre. But I want this esteemed committee to carefully notice something fundamental that just occurred. 3 distinct quotes were presented. 3 consecutive times the representative was directly confronted with her own rhetoric. And 3 consecutive times she instantly defaulted to a slightly varied version of the exact same defensive response. It was taken out of context. I didn't fully understand the historical weight behind my words. You are deliberately misrepresenting what I meant to say. He paused, allowing the silence to hang heavy in the air, ensuring every camera and every reporter absorbed the implication. 3 different, highly inflammatory statements, delivered across 3 different years, and every single time, the fault miraculously belongs to the person who heard it, and never, under any circumstances, to the person who actually said it. Another pause, this one even more deliberate, practically begging the room to lean in. I would ask this committee to sear that specific pattern into their memories, because we are about to watch it happen all over again. But this time, the stakes are not mere words. The stakes are $250 million in stolen taxpayer money. That was the precise, terrifying moment the trap was fully constructed. It was not yet sprung, but it was immaculately built. Shapiro was broadcasting his strategy to the entire room and to every citizen watching the broadcast at home. I am going to meticulously reveal a behavioral pattern, and every single time Representative Omar opens her mouth from this moment forward, she will be forced to either drastically break her 7-year pattern or hopelessly prove it correct. There was no conceivable third option. No hidden trapdoor through which she could escape. Omar, a seasoned political operative who had navigated treacherous waters for nearly a decade, instantly recognized the sophisticated setup. Sensing the walls closing in, she immediately reached for the heaviest, most reliable shield in her political arsenal. "Mr. Shapiro," she began, her tone dripping with righteous indignation. You sit here reading carefully curated tweets from 2019 that I have already publicly addressed, already formally apologized for, and that this very Congress has already acted upon. I am the first black, Muslim, immigrant woman ever elected to the United States Congress. Because of exactly this type of inflammatory rhetoric, I receive more violent threats against my life than almost any other member of this legislative body. We documented over 14,000 credible, terrifying threats last year alone. I have been physically and violently attacked at my own constituent town hall. And you want to utilize this vital committee's precious time reading old social media posts to score cheap political points? She was undeniably masterful at this tactic, genuinely, frighteningly good. In 3 rapid, emotionally charged sentences, she had seamlessly transitioned from being the target of a federal fraud inquiry to being the persecuted victim of a relentless, systemic witch hunt. She had executed this exact maneuver for 7 years, and it had yielded a 100% success rate. Historically, when she played this card, aggressive reporters nervously backed off, terrified of the optics. Committee chairs awkwardly cleared their throats and changed the subject. The impregnable victim shield went up, and the difficult questions permanently ceased. But Shapiro did not raise his voice. He did not challenge the validity of the shield, and, most crucially, he did not take the emotionally volatile bait. He executed a maneuver that almost no one in Washington ever attempts when Ilhan Omar plays her ultimate trump card. He completely agreed with the factual portion of her statement and calmly walked right past the emotional deflection. Representative, I believe you implicitly. I absolutely believe you received horrific death threats, and I condemn them. I believe the violent attack at your town hall was terrifying, real, and incredibly serious. None of that is in question today. What is definitively in question is $250 million in federal taxpayer money that was brazenly stolen from a program specifically designed to feed desperately hungry, impoverished children in your own district under a legislative loophole that you personally wrote and championed. And if the chairman allows, I would very much like to discuss the mechanics of that theft right now. That calculated pivot is precisely why Ben Shapiro operates on an entirely different intellectual plane than every other political adversary who has ever attempted to corner Ilhan Omar. Everyone else wastes their ammunition fighting the impenetrable shield. They get bogged down arguing about whether she is truly a victim, or they spiral into endless debates about whether the 2019 tweets met the exact academic definition of anti-Semitism. They wage war against the shield, allowing Omar to quietly slip out the back door while they are distracted. Shapiro didn't even bother touching the shield. He acknowledged it, bypassed it entirely, and went straight for the cold, hard financial ledger. Because money doesn't care about your demographic identity. Money doesn't care about your intersectional victimhood. Money leaves an immutable, undeniable trail. Money has receipts. If you tuned into this broadcast expecting to watch Ben Shapiro surgically dismantle Ilhan Omar's political career, you had just witnessed the destruction of her primary defensive wall, but that was merely the warm-up exercise. Because what Shapiro unleashed next regarding $250 million systematically looted from a children's meal program was the exact terrifying reason she had fought so desperately to avoid being in that room. It was the precise moment she was forced to abandon her favored defensive posture and frantically pivot to complete denial. Shapiro shifted gears with lethal smoothness. His vocal register dropped into a solemn, heavy cadence, but the relentless speed of his delivery remained unchanged. Representative, let us return to March 2020. You proudly introduced the Meals Act. That specific piece of legislation allowed independent food distributors operating outside of traditional school systems to receive massive federal reimbursements from child nutrition programs, crucially, without the standard, rigorous inspection and verification processes that were previously required. You remember introducing and lobbying for that law, correct? Omar straightened her posture, projecting an aura of legislative pride. The Meals Act was essential. It ensured that vulnerable, low-income children who desperately depended on free school lunches could still receive basic nutrition when the schools were tragically shut down during the COVID-19 pandemic. I am profoundly proud of that life-saving legislation, and I stand by it unequivocally. Shapiro nodded, his expression completely unreadable. You should absolutely be proud of the charitable intention behind the bill. Now, let me tell you about the catastrophic criminal result. And here is the critical element to understand about the atmospheric shift in that room. For the preceding 5 minutes, Shapiro had been running at a breakneck, machine gun pace, cutting Omar off mid-sentence, dominating the auditory space. Now, he deliberately, agonizingly slowed down, not out of fatigue, but because the devastating numbers he was about to articulate required vast, empty space to land with maximum destructive force. When a rhetorician like Ben Shapiro slows down, the impending weight is about to crush whatever is beneath it. A fraudulent nonprofit organization named Feeding Our Future utilized your specific legislative loophole to register dozens of completely fabricated meal sites across the state of Minnesota. These phantom sites aggressively claimed to the federal government that they were feeding tens of thousands of desperate children every single day. They were not feeding anyone. The food, in reality, did not exist. The starving children they claimed to serve did not exist. The meal distribution sites were nothing more than elaborate shell companies utilizing fake, non-existent addresses and forged, fraudulent invoices. $250 million in federal money that was explicitly appropriated to buy milk, bread, and hot meals for hungry kids was systematically stolen. He let that astronomical number breathe, letting it suffocate the room. $250 million. Then he continued, detailing the grotesque reality of the heist. That stolen money did not buy food. It went to purchasing fleets of luxury sports cars, to acquiring million-dollar waterfront real estate properties, to massive wire transfers routed directly to opaque bank accounts overseas, to lavish, exorbitant international vacations that the masterminds running these fake meal sites enjoyed, while actual flesh-and-blood children in Minneapolis went to bed crying from hunger. He turned his piercing gaze back to Omar. 65 individuals have been criminally convicted thus far. The woman who orchestrated this entire sprawling scheme was recently sentenced to 42 years in federal prison. 42 years. And the chairwoman of the Minnesota State Fraud Committee said something incredibly specific regarding your legislation, Representative. She stated on the record, she took the necessary guardrails off so that hundreds of millions of our tax dollars could be brazenly stolen. Omar's lead counsel immediately leaned over, frantically whispering in her ear, trying to break the momentum. Omar rigidly ignored him, her eyes locked forward. She had her secondary defense mechanism fully prepared and loaded. I have stated consistently from the very beginning that absolutely anyone who stole money intended for hungry children should be aggressively prosecuted to the absolute fullest extent of the law. I have absolutely no personal knowledge of any fraudulent activity connected to any meal program whatsoever. There it was, the exact trap Shapiro had warned the committee about minutes earlier. In part one of the hearing, the defense was, "My words were taken out of context." Now, confronting a massive federal crime, the defense seamlessly shifted to, "I have no knowledge." It was a completely different scandal, a totally different year, but it was the exact same woman utilizing the exact same predictable structure of evasion. The fault, as always, was never hers. She didn't know. She couldn't possibly have known. Somebody else, operating in the shadows, did it. But Shapiro, playing a game of three-dimensional political chess, was already 3 crucial steps ahead. He had been patiently waiting for her to utter those exact 3 words. "You have no knowledge," Shapiro repeated, his voice dangerously soft, tasting the words. "Okay, let me patiently walk this committee through exactly what you do have, Representative." Slowly, methodically, he raised his right hand and began counting on his fingers, locking eyes with Omar as he delivered one undeniable fact per digit. Each point was short, viciously sharp, and perfectly designed for every person listening to grasp and hold on to. April 2020, you enthusiastically recorded a promotional video for Somali TV Minnesota. You spoke directly in Somali to your core community. In that video, you personally, by name, thanked a specific restaurant called Safari, and you explicitly told your viewers that Safari was miraculously distributing 2,300 meals every single day to local families and children in need. One finger went up. That specific restaurant, Representative, was later exposed as the single largest, most lucrative fraud site in the entire Feeding Our Future criminal network. The owner was subsequently convicted of stealing $16 million from the taxpayers. Federal court records explicitly show that the restaurant was not distributing 2,300 meals per day. It was not distributing 200 meals per day. It was distributing 0 meals. Not one single child was fed. Second finger. You stated 2,300 directly on camera to your constituents. The federal court definitively concluded 0. Only one of those numbers is true, Representative, and the person who confidently broadcast the other one is currently sitting in this very room. Third finger. He did not pause for a breath, giving her no space to interject. Your name appears explicitly 6 separate times in the verified trial exhibits from the federal case against the woman who ran the entire scheme. These are documented emails and direct communications between your congressional office and multiple convicted defendants. Fourth finger. You chose to hold your highly publicized 2018 election night watch party at that exact same restaurant, the very one whose owner was later convicted of stealing $16 million from a children's meal program. Fifth finger. And when the Minnesota State Fraud Committee formally invited you to come in and voluntarily explain your extensive, documented connections to these convicted individuals, you conveniently missed the legal deadline to respond. When they subsequently moved to officially subpoena you for those documents, your own political party aggressively blocked the vote, ensuring you would never have to answer. He held up his open hand, the 5 fingers stark against the backdrop of the hearing room. 5 irrefutable facts. 5 direct documented connections, Representative. A promotional video you personally recorded, federal trial exhibits with your name stamped on them, direct emails originating from your office, a massive celebration at the headquarters of the fraud, and a legal subpoena you and your allies adamantly refuse to comply with. You say you have no knowledge, but you have an absolute mountain of circumstantial evidence sitting very, very close to you. Usually, when a witness counts off evidence on their fingers, it is a cheap, theatrical stunt performed for the cameras. When Ben Shapiro executes the maneuver, it is a masterstroke of mass communication. 5 facts, 5 fingers. It is simple enough for anyone to immediately comprehend, memorable enough to repeat to a spouse sitting next to them on the couch, and mathematically impossible for the target to explain away one at a time when all 5 facts are standing together in perfect alignment. Omar's voice finally betrayed the immense pressure. It went tight, almost shrill. I am not currently charged with any crime. No federal prosecutor has ever formally accused me of actively participating in this fraud. What you are doing right now is baseless insinuation dressed up as legitimate congressional questioning. She was factually correct. No prosecutor had indicted her. It was the only undeniable truth she had spoken all morning. And Shapiro, in a brilliant tactical move that genuinely surprised even the most cynical observers in the room, completely agreed with her. You are absolutely correct. You have not been criminally charged. I am not a prosecutor, and I am not charging you with anything today. I am sitting here simply as an expert witness, and I am asking you a fundamental question of credibility. He slowed down again, his voice undergoing another subtle transformation. The aggressive, rapid-fire prosecutor was gone. He was not angry. He was not sarcastic. His tone shifted into something resembling profound, heavy exhaustion, the specific, soul-crushing kind of exhaustion that stems from watching a horrific, glaringly obvious truth being deliberately ignored by every powerful person in the room. There are actual children in Minneapolis who went to bed agonizingly hungry during the darkest days of the pandemic. Real, breathing children, not the fake, alphanumeric ghosts listed on those fraudulent invoices. Real kids whose parents suddenly lost their jobs, whose schools were indefinitely closed, whose only guaranteed hot meal of the day was the one the United States government solemnly promised to provide. $250 million was supposed to reach the mouths of those desperate children. It did not reach them. It reached luxury car dealerships, high-end real estate offices, and shady wire transfer counters sending stacks of cash to opaque accounts overseas. He locked eyes with Omar, the weight of the tragedy fully present in his voice. You personally wrote the legislation that systematically removed the financial guardrails. You voluntarily appeared on camera heavily promoting the restaurant sitting at the very epicenter of the multi-million-dollar fraud. Your name is plastered all over the federal trial evidence. The mastermind, currently serving 42 years in a federal penitentiary, stated under oath that she believes you fully knew what was happening. And your meticulously rehearsed answer to all of this staggering evidence is just 3 hollow words: I have no knowledge. He slowly turned his head to address the entire committee, hammering the final nail into the coffin of her defense. In the first 10 minutes of this hearing, the automatic answer was, my words were taken out of context. Now, the automatic answer is, I have no knowledge. It is a completely different scandal, a totally different decade, but it is the exact same deflective structure. Every single time this elected representative gets caught standing near the wreckage of something terrible, someone else is magically to blame. The context was misinterpreted. The language was misunderstood by the masses. The bureaucratic system inexplicably failed. She simply didn't know. It is never, ever her fault. Not once in 7 years. The silence that followed landed in the hearing room like a heavy stone dropped into a perfectly still pool of dark water. It was devastating not because it was loud, but because it was undeniably painfully true. And every single person sitting in that gallery had just watched the entire psychological dissection happen in real time. They witnessed two entirely different scandals, met with two entirely different sets of hollow excuses, delivered by the exact same woman reaching for the exact same top-shelf deflection every single time she was cornered. Shapiro's voice shifted one final time. It became faster, significantly sharper, carrying the undeniable momentum of a man who had been patiently, meticulously building toward a singular, devastating climax for 20 minutes and could finally see the finish line clearly in his sights. Representative, I want to pivot now to your official congressional financial disclosures specifically, the legally binding documents that you personally signed and filed for the calendar years 2023, 2024, and 2025. Omar's lead counsel panicked, instantly realizing where this was heading, and spoke immediately, his voice practically cracking. Mr. Chairman, I strongly object. The representative's personal financial disclosures fall completely outside the stated, predetermined scope of this hearing, which is strictly focused on pandemic relief fraud. Shapiro did not even extend the courtesy of waiting for the chairman to officially rule on the desperate objection. He bulldozed right over the attorney. Mr. Chairman, when this esteemed committee is actively examining massive financial irregularities directly connected to this representative's home district, her specific legislation, and her closest political community, her own sworn financial disclosures are overwhelmingly and directly relevant, especially when those specific disclosures contain a staggering $29 million discrepancy that she has yet to adequately explain to the American public. The chairman held the gavel, paused for one agonizing second, weighing the political optics, and then simply nodded his head. The witness may continue. Omar shot a look of pure terror at her high-priced counsel. Her counsel, defeated, merely looked down at the mahogany table. That silent exchange is the universal body language of a legal defense team that knows exactly what catastrophic revelation is about to be unleashed and realizes they are completely powerless to prevent the impact. Shapiro slowly picked up a single piece of white paper from his desk. It was the very first time all morning he had looked at anything physically written down. He read 3 distinct numbers, one at a time, inserting a heavy, calculated silence between each one, a silence long enough for every single person in that room and every taxpayer listening at home to hear the number, mentally process it, and feel the sheer absurdity of it. Year 2023. Your husband, Tim Minette, officially owns financial stakes in 2 specific companies, a venture capital firm known as Rose Lake Capital and a boutique California winery called EST Crew. On your legally mandated 2023 congressional disclosure, you formally reported their combined financial value at $51,000. A long, suffocating pause. Year 2024. The exact same 2 companies, the exact same husband, a brand new financial disclosure filed under oath with the United States Congress. The new, suddenly exploded combined value, somewhere between $6 million and $30 million. A longer, even more agonizing pause. April 2026. You quietly, retroactively amended the 2024 disclosure. You abruptly changed the stated value of both companies back down to 0. You subsequently told the Washington press corps that the massive discrepancy was simply an accounting error. He slowly set the single piece of paper down on the desk and looked directly at the committee members. $51,000, $30 million, 0. 3 consecutive years, 3 wildly, incomprehensibly different financial valuations for the exact same 2 companies, owned by the exact same man. And the official explanation provided to the American people is that our accountant made a slight mistake. He snapped his gaze back to Omar, his eyes devoid of any mercy. Representative, your hardworking constituents in Minneapolis are currently working 2 exhausting jobs just to pay their monthly rent. They sit down and file honest, agonizingly accurate tax returns every single April. They meticulously report their actual, meager income down to the very last dollar because they are terrified that the IRS will destroy their lives if they don't. And yet, their elected representative in the United States Congress filed a sworn financial disclosure that was off by exactly $29,949,000 and casually brushed it off as a clerical error. Omar, visibly flustered, started to stumble through a frantic response. The original filing. The original filing was based on highly incomplete information that was provided in absolute good faith by my husband's outside business accountants. The amendment was filed completely voluntarily as soon as Shapiro was already talking over her, drowning out the rehearsed talking points. You filed the so-called voluntary amendment exactly 1 full year later, Representative. You filed it only after the House Oversight Committee officially opened an investigation into the glaring discrepancy. You filed it only after the President of the United States publicly questioned the absurd numbers on social media. You filed it only after investigative reporters began calling your congressional office on a daily basis. That original, fraudulent financial filing sat on the public record for 12 full months, proudly broadcasting a staggering $30 million net worth that only magically became an accounting error when the press and the president started asking hard questions. But Ben Shapiro wasn't finished. He had one final, devastating number chambered, and it wasn't sourced from her heavily edited disclosures, but directly from subpoenaed federal court filings. The $30 million behemoth venture capital firm her husband supposedly ran had a verified bank balance of exactly $4,244, a discrepancy so brazen, so mathematically absurd, that the solemn congressional hearing room erupted into a low, uncontrollable ripple of genuine laughter, because the human brain simply cannot process a lie that astronomical as standard political deception. It processes it as pure comedy. Yet Representative Ilhan Omar did not laugh, her face frozen in rigid fury as Shapiro surgically dismantled the remaining illusions, lowering his paper and his voice to deliver the raw, unfiltered judgment of a man who had finally run out of patience for a 7-year charade. He leaned forward and systematically laid her 4 earth-shattering scandals directly next to her 4 recycled excuses, blaming the listener for dismissing the 9/11 murders as "some people did something," blaming the language for her anti-Israel slurs, aggressively claiming ignorance while heavily promoting a local restaurant that looted $16 million from starving children, and blaming her faceless accountant for a massive financial mirage, proving to the entire room that every single time she is caught in the blast radius of a scandal, the fault miraculously belongs to the context, the system, or the listener, but never to her. The silence that followed landed like a physical blow, marking the absolute shattering of the impenetrable deflective shields that had protected her from timid reporters and cautious politicians for nearly a decade, leaving her staring blankly at the wall with absolutely no answer, as Shapiro simply folded his paper and walked out of the building before her motorcade even left the garage. But while retired veterans, fixed-income grandparents, and hard-working taxpayers faithfully send their money to Washington trusting it goes to hungry children, $250 million of it bought imported Maseratis, waterfront condos, and first-class tickets to non-extradition countries, leaving us with a powerful lawmaker who wrote the very loophole that enabled the heist, staring into the camera, claiming zero knowledge. As the heavy wooden doors of Longworth 1310 finally swung shut, leaving only the deafening echo of Shapiro's unanswered questions, a terrifying new reality began to dawn on the committee. If the legislation wasn't just a misguided accident, if the $30 million wasn't just a clerical error, and if the massive federal fraud trail doesn't actually end at that Minnesota restaurant, then who exactly is the mysterious partner waiting at the other end of those overseas wire transfers? And what happens when the Department of Justice finally stops asking politely and the grand jury subpoenas start calling the one name she can no longer hide behind?